I have also not spoken about this very openly in various places. So I think I have a onus of explaining why I resigned. Just like people would imagine that their life has to be personal, I always imagined my life to be public. I had always designed my life in such a way that it needs to be public. Simply couldn't believe my eyes of what was happening. I couldn't simply sleep for nights. The only benefactor of this whole event, whole nonsense, was the political class, of how people can be managed or people can be brainwashed to do things. Be it Muslims or Hindus, it didn't matter to me. For me, it was all poor innocent people. This cannot happen in my country, and that too in this 21st century. There should be something fundamentally wrong in what we are and what we have become. Populism is one part of that ism. There was a very strong match on what was happening and what had happened in history. We are moving towards a catastrophe, and we are driving the whole country towards that catastrophe. And who is driving it? It is ourselves. This is not good for us. This is not good for our families. That the government has now reached a stage, after 5 years, 6 years, now reached a stage where it is ready to experiment on things which had already happened in history. This, I think, is the second independence movement. Hello and welcome back. Thanks a lot for the response that you showed to my last video. The last video which I had posted was with deep agony about the hijab issue. Anybody who loves this country would not want to witness the scenes that is being played out in the country right now. But nevertheless, it is high time that we as Indians understand what India is and try to uphold the values of India and try to understand why pluralism is the crux on the soul of India and why we should protect this. There is no point in not protecting this and saying that India will survive. In the last video, I also had mentioned that all of us will have to do something or the other. Whatever we are capable from our side, whether if we can paint, we should paint. If we can write, we should write. If we can talk to some people, we should talk. But we have to uphold and try to understand and propagate the idea of India. I would be failing my duty if I don't continuously talk and extend this video series into something further. And I, having worked in the government for so long and having seen things from different perspectives, it will be justified for me to share these perspectives with you and try and do my bit in protecting this idea of India. The first thing anybody would ask me after my name is the question, why did you resign? Why did you resign from a service that is so coveted, and what made you exactly do that? Often people would assume that I resigned because of tremendous pressure from politicians, communal mafia and the sand mafia and things like that. And sometimes even after explaining why I resigned, many times people would still try and ask me that, like, what exactly made you resign? So I think that issue has to be dealt with first. I have to explain very clearly why did I resign, because that has a lot of connection with what we are talking about in this video. I have also not spoken about this very openly in various places. So I think I have a onus of explaining why I resigned and what is the exact situation under which I resigned from the IAS. Well, we are two brothers, siblings, born to parents who are first generation educated. Our families were not very privileged economically, socially, caste wise. The first person to push me into public life was my father. I remember him telling very clearly that I have two sons. One is for the home and the other is for the country. And I very candidly assumed that I am the one for the country. And another word that I remember very fondly from my father is that one should never forget the path that one has traversed. And this is something which still haunts me today. We have traveled as a family, have traveled a very rough path. Of course, we never got to see that roughness because my parents protected us. But I do believe, and I have seen it for myself, that that path which people travel is not that smooth. So I have to go back in this path and try to bring people who are struggling so that I can fulfill my life and live the son that my father wanted me to live as. Hence, from a very young age, I started thinking that my life has to be public. Just like people would imagine that their life has to be personal, I always imagined my life to be public. I had always designed my life in such a way that it needs to be public. So this is where my interest and my love for my people, for my country, for my fellow humans started, and that is what culminated into my further things. I had a very protected childhood, and hence I was very desperate to join a college without the influence of my parents or without their support. It was college where I got exposed to life, where I started seeing my friends from different categories of socio-economic categories, and that actually exposed me to develop a keen interest in poverty, privileges, and other things. College is also the place where I met my spouse Sujata, who has been a constant partner in whatever I've been doing since then. The more I started seeing the lives of the poor, I started getting a keen interest on their knowledge, their ability to thrive, their ability to see things from different perspectives, and that really became my world, and that is where I really wanted to spend the rest of my career, in understanding poverty and in trying to make lives better for people who are otherwise very oppressed and underprivileged. Post college, I did a small software stint, just like any other person during the 2K. So I quickly realized that that is not my game, and I had to leave it in between. I then joined as a lecturer in a college, a semi-rural college, stayed with the students, trying to understand whether I can work well in the social realm. And that proved to be a very good experience for me. And that is when I realized that I am good at that, and I'm enjoying this process of working with people. To test myself further, I joined an NGO and worked in the area of bonded labor. And that gave me absolute satisfaction in trying to understand what I was interested in. Somebody once told me, government is the biggest NGO, so why don't you try it? And that is when I realized that I have to sort of become or try and write the civil service examination, and that is when my journey towards civil service examination started. Another important period that influenced my perspective is 2002 during my preparation. Anyone who was little bit aware of the contemporary events at that time would realize that this was when the Godhra riots happened. And even though India is known for many such riots, this is the riot which was happening during my period in the 21st century. And I simply couldn't believe my eyes of what was happening. I couldn't simply sleep for nights realizing or thinking about people and neighbors and friends going for each other's families, killing each other, harming each other, and I couldn't simply fathom how could that happen. I also understood that the only benefactor of this whole event, whole nonsense, was the political class. There was nothing which anybody gained out of it, neither the majority community nor the minority community, except losing near and dear ones. So this is something which I thought or this event is something which really made me see things. Another important aspect of this event is that even the proposal that there was a little bit of connivance from the government made me completely reorient my thought process. I couldn't understand how this could happen. That is when I started seeing things That is when I started seeing the politics of all this, the politics of communalization, the politics of populism, the politics of fascism, and how this authoritarian structure or a framework is deposed on a country. So I started a specific interest in this area of how people can be managed or people can be brainwashed to do things. And that is when I started taking psychology as a subject. I really wanted to understand mass psychology on how things work. Nothing can be more sinister than allowing people, innocent people, to go behind each other, to go for each other's families and to kill each other. Be it Muslims or Hindus, it didn't matter to me. For me, it was all poor, innocent people. And I thought that this cannot happen in my country, and that too in this 21st century. If this is happening at this time, there should be something fundamentally wrong in what we are, on what we have become, and where we have traveled to. So that has become my quest in the coming days. From that point onwards, human sufferings is something which had shaped my world vision. I always tried to empathize or be with the people who are underdogs, who have been suffering in the society or who have subjected to oppression. And that had also sort of developed my perspective on my preparation to civil service was also heavily influenced by that perspective. Come 2009, I had cleared the civil service, securing 9th rank All India, and from there I had spent very good time in the LBSNA Academy with my friends and colleagues. It was a wonderful, I have wonderful memories like everybody else. After finishing training, I was allotted to the Karnataka cadre, and I started working in the Karnataka cadre in the capacity of Assistant Commissioner in Bellary. After that I had gradually got promoted, spent 2 years in Shimoga as CEO Zilla Panchayat, and then I was DC for District Deputy Commissioner or District Magistrate for Chitradurga for the election period, after which I also became the Deputy Commissioner of Raichur in 2014. So 2014 is another year which is very, very important in my timeline, because that is the year when the politics, which was the epicenter in Godhra, gradually moved forward in the national realm and then took control of the central government. Now, what is this politics all about? This is the politics which took control of the country in 2014. Is a mix of many isms that we would be reading in political science, or anybody who's interested in political psychology would be easily spotting that. Populism is one part of that ism. Populism is a kind of politics in which the name of the people is used to basically further a dictatorial push. You separate or you blame whatever has been happening on the elites, and then you say that the real people are the people who matter, and then finally you say that the real people's voice matters and I am the voice of the real people. This is a combination, and then finally it is a structure by which you can, a politics by which you can grab power in democracy, and it has been widely used in the world for a long time. Anyway, that is for a different video on what is populism and how it operates. So it was in 2014 that this politics, which was in the center of Godhra, took over the country. That rang a bell in me, but even though it rang a bell, I thought India was this hugely plural country, unlike any homogeneous state, and it is very difficult to control India as such. So I was very confident, super confident, that this will not work in India. My interest in the politics of populism and authoritarianism, totalitarianism doubled at that time, and I started comparing whatever was the set framework with what was happening in India. And believe me, there was a very strong match on what was happening and what had happened in history, and that led me to believe and understand where we are going towards. And on the way, I also kind of understood how people will be fooled to believe what they believe in. In 2017, when I was posted as Deputy Commissioner Dakshin Kannada being a slightly communally charged place, I was given a very clear briefing by the then government that I had to put myself very strongly and control the communal overtones. And the moment I entered Dakshin Kannada, that was my only goal: try to understand how communalization works in a particular place and what it has done to Dakshin Kannada. And someday I'll be posting a video on what has happened to Dakshin Kannada and how things have changed since the communalization started. In 2019, the general elections came and I was the election officer of Dakshin Kannada, and I really wanted to see that whether the same kind of politics can further its claws into the country. By this time, significant damage has already been done to the social fabric of this country, and in 2019 I expected that may not be the case. But on the contrary, the same politics won over again, probably with a little bit of more vote percentage. That made me feel in a certain way. I knew where we are heading to, and I also understood there was a complete silence from the people as such. Yes, there were groups of elites and intellectuals talking about this, but there was no major response from the people as such. So I really felt like a fisherman in the sea who could see the tsunami coming, in the sea from a long distance. And I have a family to protect on the coast. I had only one option, that I had to come to the coast and save not only my family, the families that I could save. So that was the feeling that I was traveling at that point of time, that we are moving towards a catastrophe and we are driving the whole country towards that catastrophe. And who is driving it? It is ourselves. And we not realizing, because of history and whatever has happened, we have not realized what we are doing, and because of that we are moving ourselves and our families towards this catastrophe. So I really thought that I had to now take up a call of coming out and fighting this, coming out and explaining to people that we are moving towards a catastrophe, and coming out and doing my bit in what I had to do. Another thought which was completely on my head was the Nuremberg trials, when the bureaucrats of the Nazi Germany was tried and asked how you had the will and the mind to perpetuate this when this was happening. The only answer that every bureaucrat gave there was, no, we were simply following orders. We didn't do anything else. And that was their defense in Nuremberg. I didn't want myself to be in a position when the government itself was propagating this, and me being a civil servant bound by the conduct rules and other things, to stay in that position and do what the government is asking me to do. I had to stay on the right side of history. I didn't have an option. I had to come out and fight with even the smallest of people who are fighting with. I had to join hands and do something about it. That is the mindset in which I was there, and that was becoming clearer and clearer as things were proceeding. What exactly happened? What triggered my resignation? In fact, this might be surprising to many people. The other question I am regularly asked is that, how did your family take it? How did your wife take it? How did your parents take it? For both these questions, there is this answer. So I would, narrate. It was one fine evening that my spouse was there in the house, and I finished my duty in the evening, and we had come over, and where after dinner we were watching the news, and this is exactly when Article 370 was abrogated and the whole Kashmir was made into a prison. So during in civil service, we have preventive procedures in which we would incarcerate people in expectation of a crime. We would incarcerate them for 24 hours, 48 hours, depends on what request is made by the what information that the magistrate gets about this person. Even during that time, even for 24 hours to one person, I would not do it that simply, or I would lose my sleep over curtailing his rights, because we are a country which thrives on rights. Of course, there's now a lot of talk about duties and things. Duties cannot come when rights cannot be delivered. Rights have to be delivered by the state, first of all, protected, and that is when duties start. At the end of the ensuring of rights is where duties start. So imagine an entire state being incarcerated for so many months that we did. That was an alarm bell for me, that if a country, if a government could do this, if a government could put an entire state into house arrest, that government can do anything. And just go back into history and see when these things have happened. We have umpteen number of examples, right from Nazi Germany to other totalitarian regimes, where the government was able to do this. So that was something which told me that the government has now reached a stage, after 5 years, 6 years, it has now reached a stage where it is ready to experiment on things which had already happened in history. So that is when my wife was next to me. In fact, she pushed me. In fact, she started asking me, look, Sashi, look at you, you were this rebel in college trying to work with the poor and whatnot. Now you have lost all that. And she was absolutely destroyed that I was now in a big bungalow managing a district and not bothered about how the country is going. In fact, that thought that my wife started thinking about this, like this about me, shattered me to an extent that I told her immediately that yes, now I have to stop and I have to go into this fight. And that is when I decided that I would do that. Regarding my parents and my brother, when I broke the news to them that I am going to resign, not even a word of non-acceptance. They were completely accepting this, and they completely understood why I am doing this. They also completely understood what consequences will be there for me if I do this openly with this government. But they were completely understanding that I had to do this, and this is how my path will proceed in the future. So there was not a single word of non-acceptance from my family that I have to rethink this or maybe choose a better time. Neither from my parents, neither from my brothers, neither from my wife. In fact, the day I resigned, I reached my wife. She was ready with a cake and a big party to celebrate that I am going to, sort of enter this fight along with the people who are fighting on the ground. On the day of my resignation, I didn't want to make a big issue out of it. I really wanted to conserve my energy so that I can fight in the long run. I really didn't want to go to press and say many things. I had written a letter on the day of my resignation. That is, after the discussion with my wife, on the 6th day after that, I had given my resignation, and I wanted to resign from the post of the Deputy Commissioner because it was a protest resignation. It was against the policies of the government. It was very clearly against the way in which the government is running this country. And I had written a resignation letter, which I had drafted in only 10 minutes on my resignation day. And I think that spoke what I needed to tell, and that I had to get and start joining hands with people who are on the ground, who are fighting. So on that day, I just took one day for me to pack my things. I didn't have much. I had an old bullet, and I kicked my bullet from Mangalore and drove all the way to Bangalore, where my wife was already waiting. Life after resignation has been great. In fact, I would say that I would have been extremely unhappy if I would not have taken the call. I have traveled to places that I would not have otherwise traveled. I have met some of the best human beings in my entire life in these last 2 years. I have joined hands with students, I have joined hands with many very, very brave people in the society in their fight, and I have been doing my bit in whatever I can. I have also joined hands with many civil society movements, the political forum of the Congress Party. I have joined hands with many ground workers. Have also been a part of greatest people's movement which has happened in this country. I regard this NRCCA as a very big people's movement. I would rather talk about it in some other video. It requires a little bit of time. So life after resignation has been exactly going in the direction that I wished it will be going. Yeah, I did regret leaving service at one point, only one point. That is when COVID struck. When COVID struck, I was absolutely shattered that I was not on the ground. When I saw my colleagues on the ground working day and night, risking their lives and standing and leading, I really did want to be there in the field. Other than that, I never had any problem with leaving the service, because the service has a lot of good people, because I have worked with all of them, moved with all of them. I know there are huge number of capable and very extremely talented IAS officers, IPS officers. The youth of this country is still a very vibrant lot which understand what India is all about. So I don't have any worries that I left service early or anything like that. To people who would say that you did a big sacrifice or anything, I really don't think it is a sacrifice. It is a choice that I have taken. Yes, and there was a fight, and there is a requirement for people like me to get into that fight, and it is a thing that we had to do. I always keep giving this example of this freedom movement, where people left their families, left their property, left their jobs. The first prime minister of this country spent 11 years in prison. That's the kind of sacrifice which our forefathers have done, so that we would travel or we would ride this wave of freedom and liberty for the last 70 years. I think now it is our turn. Now it is our turn to create that wave for our next generation. And whether we will be up to it is a question we have to ask ourselves. And what are we going to deliver to our next generation if we don't give this sphere of happiness, this brotherhood, and this goodness? That's something which is really very important. So to people who ask why you did this big sacrifice or things like that, I keep telling them, no, this is not a sacrifice at all compared to what had happened in our history. This is absolutely nothing. And why not? This, I think, is the second independence movement.